So we've been thinking about when do we do another class. We did Demon Hunter and very thrilled with how that went.
The hero that you never thought you'd see.
So the question was, okay, when do we do another new class? And we thought the time was right to do Death Knight. So we started actually way earlier than we normally would. One of the things we learned from Demon Hunter was just how much work it was to designing a new class from scratch and getting their core mechanics right. So much would have to get adjusted if some of those core mechanics changed. So we wanted to start earlier. And so a couple of us split off early, about 3 months before when initial design for the project would normally start, to start on Death Knight specifically. But that meant that when initial design started, we were already in a decent place, at least for Death Knight. We had already explored a whole bunch of mechanics, had our sort of blue sky, anything is possible phase, and had started narrowing down what we were looking for. And nothing was fully set in stone at that point, but it gave us such a jump start that we could feel confident going into initial design and final design and have that final result. So it's been a year and a half that we've been thinking about when and how to do it, and then actively in development for just a couple months short of that. Death Knights are a class in World of Warcraft and like deep in Warcraft lore, and so we started there for a lot of ideas. We explored a lot of different things that we thought might have potential for being part of our class. I think runes are a good example of that. In Warcraft, runes are your like primary resource that you're using on abilities constantly, moment-to-moment gameplay. And so one of the things that we experimented with a whole lot early on was, okay, what are some crazy things like they don't have mana, they have runes instead? What does that look like? Or maybe they have mana and runes. We did a whole bunch of exploration in that track with like cards had a mana cost and a rune cost, and like every other turn you'd gain a new rune of your choice, or based on your deck, you'd define a deck building, or there were a bunch of different ways that we considered doing that. And so these powerful cards cost like 5 mana and a frost rune. The net result of that was, this sounds cool in theory, but mana already works to control how much you can play in a turn, how much power you can output each turn, and how much you can do in combo with each other. Mana already serves that role. But we did like the deck building aspect of it, of like, in most of those we were looking at like, we build a deck around like frost runes or blood runes or unholy runes or some combination of those, or you'd get to choose like what your rune lineup for the deck was or whatever, and then build your deck around that. And the result of that was the Rune System, where you now get to have 3 rune slots on your deck and choose any combination of blood, frost, and unholy, and then the cards require runes. So we ended up getting roughly the same impact of that on deck building without the gameplay. It was important to us that it didn't feel like just 3 separate classes. It should still feel like one class, Death Knight. They just have they have a really wide selection of powerful things they can do. A lot of that came down to, we really liked the Rune System because it lets Death Knights do a lot of powerful things in a more balanceable, controlled, fair way. There's so many things that a Death Knight can do in Warcraft lore and World of Warcraft that it was like, Well, it just doesn't feel like a Death Knight if they're not blasting you with frost spells, if they're not tanking a ton of damage with lifesteal, if they're not summoning tons of swarms of armies of the dead.
Rise and serve your king.
It just was like, well, it doesn't feel like Death Knight without this, and that, and this, and that. So it's important for there to be strengths and weaknesses to create a fun, balanced game for Hearthstone. So Rune System lets you have all those strengths, but you get to pick and choose them.
My frost will splinter your flesh!
Blood, Frost, and Unholy are the three specializations of Death Knights in Warcraft, and that felt pretty central to them. So that was all along the plan there, at least for the general flavor of things, but there definitely was some flexibility about, like, for a lot of development, it was Frost who got big AoE spells, and that eventually moved over to Blood. And like card draw was originally centered on, I think Blood had the best card draw, most of it early on in development, and then that shifted around to like everybody gets a bit. Frost is pretty good, especially, but that meant like the individual mechanics were shifting around, but the overall concept of being like, oh, okay, you're a spells combo-y Frost DK, or you're a big tanky Blood DK, that was pretty locked in from the start.
When we were designing Death Knight, we sketched out this this accessibility chart for them. Which runes get access to what things, and the deeper into the rune specialization that you get, the more powerful, the more core fantasy you get of that thing. So for instance, in Blood, as you go through the rune specializations, you go from like a single target lifesteal spells to AoE lifesteal spells to max health manipulation. And I think when you take that, we get to put these abilities, these powers like Vampiric Blood, in instance, which changes your max health, in the triple rune specializations, and it gives them something totally unique to them, totally unique to Blood Death Knight, and totally unique across all classes. So I think from part of it is, it's not just a power, it's not just a measure of power, it's also a measure of how many rules do we get to break? What do we get to do here that no other class gets to do? So that's part of it. And I think the other thing is that we want every single rune specialization to have something interesting, something that pulls you into that direction, wants you to try to build that deck. And I think when it comes to triple runes, you're giving up so much that we did extend the power band for those cards. I would say that if you're looking at a triple rune card, we do intend for those to be more powerful than, you know, a no rune or a one rune, and even some of the 2 rune cards. So because you're making so many sacrifices, we do want to reward players that are choosing to go that heavily into that rune specialization. That's not to say we think that the triple runes need to be the best thing ever. We came up with a lot of different ways to hook in synergies from like 2 runes of one specialization, 1 rune of another. We want players to mix and match and explore here. But if you go that triple runes, I think you will be finely rewarded, heavily rewarded. Not heavily, a mixture between those 2.
There is a cap that we can't comfortably go over in any card. And obviously power creep is something that we get asked about a lot, and is something that we're always very aware of. And especially with making, you know, cards like triple blood rune cards. Something like Vampiric Blood is an extension of the single rune and double blood rune cards. It just sort of takes it to that next level. Is it objectively more powerful? If you compare apples to oranges, maybe a little bit, but not necessarily out of the realm of reason, I think is the important thing that we were looking at. We need to balance, okay, this is powerful enough to entice players to play the 3 rune decks, because the versatility of being able to splash single rune cards from another rune is so enticing and can be so powerful that you need to compensate a little bit, but also I think just being able to capture that fantasy of you played a Blood Death Knight in World of Warcraft, you were a tank, now you're a tank in Hearthstone.
Yeah.
You've got access to that additional life gain with cards like Vampiric Blood. Yeah, so sort of balancing the power expectations and the flavor expectations.
The biggest challenge that we faced when designing Death Knights, and I think it's going to be the challenge whenever we make a new class, is the hero power for a class. There are so many different constraints related to the hero power that makes it an impossible task to really create a great design, yet somehow Initial always seems to do it. It needs to be simple, right? You need to be able to understand, the first time you click it, you need to understand what's going on. It needs to be within a very narrow band of power, right? We don't want you to just be pressing the hero power every single turn and have that be the best thing that you do. We want you to play cards. But it also needs to be so iconic to what the class is about, because the hero power kind of dictates everything that the class will do for the rest of time.
My thanks.
Warrior has its armor up hero power. How many archetypes or how many ways to play Warrior are inspired by that? Hunter deals 2 damage to the opponent's face. You know, something as simple as that means that Hunter is, the whole theming around Hunter is based around the hero power. So going into Death Knight, that was always going to be the biggest challenge. How do we create something that it captures the spirit of Death Knight to its core, fundamental, like if you had to give a 1-word or 1-sentence description, how does it capture that? Stays in that power range and also lets us create new archetypes, creates new ways to play in Hearthstone. That's another thing for hero powers, you know, it needs to be new. So with Death Knight, I think the initial design team really gave us maybe the best possible starting place when we started with Death Knight. With Demon Hunter, there's a lot of iteration with the hero power, even into its final stages. With Death Knight, we basically locked in the idea of it.
Hero power, a lot of the things we tried interacted with runes back when they were a gameplay thing. We also explored summoning ghouls, zombies of different stat sizes, of different like die at end of turn or not. The corpse mechanic ended up being something we really did like as the special in combat or like in gameplay mechanic for Death Knight. So this hero power that we ended up going with, or at least very close to it, it had rush instead of charge through much of development. That was one of the leading options for a long, long time. We tried a whole bunch of different other things related to runes, related to like we had like a choose one sort of thing, like do a blood thing, a frost thing, or an unholy thing. It was a lot of complication for a hero power, something supposed to be very basic. And ultimately just the temporary minion that dies and guaranteed gives you a corpse was the right balance of synergies, complexity. It's a baseline that is useful in every situation somewhat and interacts with your other mechanics. And based on cementing on that, we felt confident doing the corpse mechanic. If we didn't have the hero power guaranteed giving you corpses each turn, I think the corpse mechanic would have been a lot more shaky for us.
I think when we went into Demon Hunter creation, the very first class we made after the initial 9 in Hearthstone, we had to sort of give ourselves the license to break the rules when it came to the hero power, just because the rules had been so clearly established. They were 2 mana, they are relatively low in power level, and for Demon Hunter, even just committing to making hero power that costs 1 mana was something that took a while to come to that realization. So we already had a leg up when we went into Death Knight, saying if we want to break the rules a little bit, we can. As long as we, remain within reason. And it just so happened that, we did settle on a 2-mana hero power, but something that works very uniquely with the flavor of Death Knight, with, the new undead minion type, and then of course with the corpse mechanic.
I think another thing that we experimented with and then hit the cutting room floor, so to speak, was plagues. Plagues are a big element of Death Knight gameplay in WoW, with them having multiple different diseases that they apply to their opponents as like damage over time effects and debuffs. And so we explored multiple plagues or a common plague debuff or maybe something tied to which rune you were predominantly using. Net result of all that was, well, it really depended on what your opponent was doing more than what you wanted to do, because your opponent needed to have minions for you to apply these diseases to. Didn't feel like you were in control of the game, and it didn't feel like these were that necessary. It was also just a lot of added complication of tracking, like, okay, are you really gonna apply 2 different debuffs to enemy minions regularly? And then they're probably gonna die. You probably wanna just have them die. That's mostly what you're going for, within a turn or two, so the debuffs don't really have time to do much there. So we ended up taking the, just the couple cards that were using those diseases, those plagues, and using those. So Blood Boil was our favorite version of, our favorite use of our Blood Plague. That made it in as a card. And Scourge Strike was our favorite version of Unholy's Plague. Frost's Plague kind of turned into a few different cards. It wasn't carried over specifically on anything, but we learned along the way and it inspired a bunch of other ideas. So there's hints of the plagues made it through all that iteration, but plagues as an overall mechanic didn't really suit Hearthstone, even though it was something we were excited to explore from Warcraft. I'm really excited to see what players think of Death Knight. I'm looking forward to talking to players and hearing what they think of it once they've got to try it out. And I want to hear from all you Death Knight mains out there, people who are going to be like, I'm going all in on Death Knight, or specifically like, who's going to be like me and be all Frost all the time? Well, let's channel some icy blasts here, guys.